I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for watching. Well, so far this summer, the biggest storms have not been in the tropics, but on TV as the politics in the contentious presidential election reaches the post-convention phase. We'll examine what to expect in Louisiana in the presidential and congressional races. We'll also look at the advancement of women in local politics. Short-term rentals is an issue that has some temperatures rising. We'll look at the issues as well as new growth in business and surprising results in measuring lead levels in the soil. On the map for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Clancy Dubos, political editor, Gambit Weekly. Kathy Finn, freelance journalist. And Jeff Adelson, reporter, the New Orleans Advocate. I'm going to go over to Clancy first. And now conventions are behind us. We're formally in the presidential campaign of 2016. How's Louisiana going to handle it?
Well, I think like most states, as many people are looking forward to the Olympics next week as looking forward to the presidential race, maybe more. I don't know who's going to win gold medals, but the expectation is that Donald Trump will carry Louisiana. Although, you know what? Who knows what can happen? I tweeted once recently that if HBO had done a series 2 years ago on the narrative arc of what has actually happened in this presidential campaign, people would have loved it, but they all would have said there's no way that could ever happen, and yet it happened. Mm-hmm. So I think there are more surprises on the way. I don't know if they'll be in Louisiana, but there will be more surprises. I would expect that Karen Carter Peterson, who's the chair of the Democratic Party in Louisiana, will play a leading role in the Hillary Clinton campaign. I'm sure there will be some honorary or type campaign chairs, and also on the Republican side, Roger Villery, who's the state party chair, will play a leading role for Trump, and there'll be some honorary chairs there. Steve Scalise has already endorsed Trump, as have, I think, all or just about all of our Republican Congress members. So, you know, there'll be a phalanx out there in Louisiana for Trump, and there'll be a push for Clinton.
And Mitch Landrieu and Cedric Richmond have said they're going to be out campaigning.
Yes, they'll be out. They may, in fact, be the honorary chairs for statewide for Hillary Clinton. You know, you would think, well, Louisiana's a red state, other than John Bel Edwards winning the governor's race, and he did that by beating David Vitter, who was a very flawed Republican candidate. You know, Republicans have carried Louisiana for the last couple of decades. I think Bill Clinton was the last Democrat to carry Louisiana. It's going to be real tough for Hillary to carry this state. That's true, but you know what? Barack Obama got 41% of the vote against McCain.
In 2008?
Actually, against Romney in 2012. He got a little bit less than that against McCain. If he can get 41%, who's to say Hillary Clinton can't get 45 or 46? And if you're that close, that's enough where turnout could make a big difference.
Right.
And in presidential elections in Louisiana, that is the highest turnout every 4 years in the entire 4-year cycle, hands down. Everybody turns out for a presidential race.
You know, the 2 times that Clinton ran for president, he carried Louisiana, but the first time was the Ross Perot factor. That kind of, and so yes. He carried it, but he carried it with a plurality.
Right.
And in the second time, I think there was still that neighbor factor. You know, the governor of Arkansas. I don't think anybody thinks the Clintons.
I think that was part of it. Also, Bob Dole was not you know, Bob Dole's now reached the stage of being a senior statesman. He's making Viagra commercials. He's gone on to other things. But back then, he was kind of the sourpuss of that campaign. Yeah. He was a very witty guy, but very acerbic wit, and he didn't have that warm and fuzzy thing going. And Clinton did. But you're right, he was from a neighboring state. And Louisiana, back then, was still predominantly Democratic. I mean, the second time Clinton ran and won was the first time Mary Landrieu won a race for the Senate. We were still a blue state back then in the South. We hadn't reached the Republican majority in terms of how we vote and in our legislature.
So what do you think we can expect in terms of candidates visiting or people representing their campaign to Louisiana? Will it be busy?
More surrogates than candidates. If there's money to be raised, the candidates will be here. But I think that's what it won't be necessarily to come here to pick up our 8 electoral votes. It'll be to come here to pick up maybe $800,000 in campaign checks. I think the presidential race, as you alluded to in the introduction, Marcy, will have a tremendous impact on the ballot. It will be a big turnout. It could affect everything from the Orleans Parish School Board races to the open races for Congress in Southwest and Northwest Louisiana. Mm-hmm. to the U.S. Senate race.
Probably the one race that the presidential voting in Louisiana will affect the least is the presidential race, because essentially we're 50 statewide elections. We're not one big nationwide election. And so if Louisiana is pretty solidly in one camp, it's not going to make that much difference one way or the other.
No, but the campaign itself for president and people talking about it and getting worked up about it, and let's face it, people are worked up on both sides, and even people in the middle are worked up about the choices that they've got or what they think is the lack of choices they have. It's going to affect turnout. It's going to affect, I think, have a big impact on our U.S. Senate race with David Duke in the mix, along with 6 other Republicans. One's an independent but runs like a Republican, 2 major Democrats. Anything can happen in that race.
Yeah, we're going to delve into that a little bit later in the show. But first, I want to just have a quick assessment from you, being the political analyst that you are, your assessment of the 2 conventions.
Well, the Democrats had a lot more unity, a lot less. I mean, the Bernie people were disruptive, but you didn't have anybody standing up there making a primetime speech failing to endorse Hillary Clinton, as Ted Cruz did. The Republicans had more of a curiosity factor, was from the standpoint of, what is he going to say now? Or what are they going to say? Or what is Ivanka going to wear? Or whatever. But the Democrats definitely had more star power. The Republican convention, to me, was defined more by who wasn't there. The Democratic convention was defined by who was there. I mean, think about this. The Republican governor of the host state did not attend the Republican convention. Yeah. That's amazing.
That is amazing. And I think I read that the first debate is the night of the first Saints game or televised Saints game. I think I read that. Well, that's going to be a hard choice.
Preseason game. It's going to be a tough choice. Yeah. The DVRs will be going for sure.
Okay. Thanks, Clancy. Over to Errol now, and talking about women in politics, particularly local.
First, let me just say, I wouldn't rule out the importance of the Olympics in this whole process, because it always falls that the Olympics is between the conventions and the election. I'm sure the networks have a lot to do with that. So it's sort of like a cooling off period, that when you badly need a cooling off period, then after Labor Day, it kind of kicks up again.
You know, it'd be interesting to see which candidates, if either, runs commercials during the Olympics, and what the tenor of those commercials will be. I mean, there's no way to tell.
Anyway, the events of the week just made me think about women in politics in Louisiana, and it's been a mixed bag with success. Probably in recent times, where there's been the most success is in the New Orleans City Council. I mean, there was a time a few years ago, for a couple of years, where where women had a 6-1 majority on the city council. Now it's 4-3, and the switch to me has nothing to do with gender. It's just politics and term limitations and just the way that things happen. It could very easily go back to 6-1. Jefferson Parish is 5-2, male-female, but there's never been a female mayor of New Orleans, but I don't think that suggests an anti-female feeling. I think the main reason is that there's never been a really strong Democratic female candidate. And if you have that right person at the right time, that person can be elected also.
Doesn't it make sense that with women coming into their own at the council level, the next step, the glass ceiling, as it were, is the mayor's race?
Absolutely. I mean, there's more people on the playing field now. And so, I think that's coming into place. On the congressional level, of course, we had Mary Landrieu, who was there for a long time. We've had 2 women who were in Congress, Kathy Long and Lindy Boggs. In both cases, they succeeded a deceased husband, which is not uncommon in congressional politics. But what was uncommon, though, with Lindy Boggs, because she was a force in herself. I mean, she wasn't someone that was just filling out a term, and she became just a major figure. And in Stephanie Grace's column in The Advocate today, she tells this great story about Lindy Boggs, a member of Congress, the influence she had on changing the law allowing single women to apply for credit without anybody else's signature. Women. Yeah, and that was a really major change.
And that was in the 70s. That's hard to believe.
Early on. I don't know if it was her first term, but it was very early on. Because she actually had problems herself. And Lindy was not a poor person when Hale Boggs died, but she still had difficulty establishing her own credit. And the way she did it was absolutely, she finessed it. She didn't go out and bang the table. She totally finessed it, and that was the way she did everything.
I think one factor is that there have been cases of women with young children who were interested in a political career, but who wanted to wait until the kids were older, until they got involved with somebody like Jackie Clarkson. I mean, she could grow all her kids and still have a long career. It might still be going on for all we know, right? And all was emerging. But those people we're always provided a great source of activists behind the scenes and doing a lot of organizing and doing a lot of issue-oriented work. So it's been a very major factor.
What about somebody like Karen Carter-Peterson? Would she be a likely...
She's been rumored to be talked about as a candidate for mayor, but I think she's got other ambitions. But you know what's interesting is successful as women candidates have been in Orleans Parish, if Gambit's coming out this Sunday with first of a two-part cover story series about women in Louisiana and the fate, the state of women in the state of Louisiana, which overall is not very good. But the first one deals a lot with politics. Other than in the City Council of New Orleans, women are not faring well politically in terms of running for office. We've got one of the lowest percentages of women in the legislature.
14% last I checked.
Yeah.
I checked on that in 2016, and so we're not last, but we're about fifth in the state, fifth to the bottom.
Yeah.
Yep. But it wasn't that long ago. Committee 21 was started in the 90s to get women in office. We are seeing more, but still a lot more needs to be done. Oh, thanks a lot, guys. Okay, we're going to go over to Jeff right now to a real heated issue in the parish of Orleans, certainly. In other parishes too, for that matter. Short-term rentals, but particularly in Orleans, because that's where it's having the greatest impact.
It's certainly a lot more widespread in Orleans than it is in any of the neighboring parishes. And we're coming up on a decision on this. The City Planning Commission is going to be holding a hearing in a couple weeks to decide how to move forward with regulating short-term rentals. That decision is going to eventually have to go to the City Council for approval. But so far, the big fight really is focused on what are called whole home rentals. People who take a full single-family home in a residential area and rent it out. And opponents of short-term rentals say that that's decreasing the housing stock, it's disrupting neighborhoods. You now, especially in some areas like Marigny and the Bywater, where there's a huge proliferation of short-term rentals, you have some blocks where that are just filled with these.
So what are some of the proposals then that are out there?
Well, the Planning Commission staff has come up with a proposal that basically would allow 4 different types. It would allow the whole home rentals, it would allow what are called commercial rentals, which are condos and things like that in non-residential areas. It would allow people to rent out rooms or a half double if they were living and owned the property, and what are called temporary, which would be the typical practice of leaving town during Mardi Gras and renting out your home just for a few weeks a year. So those are the 4 proposals that are on the table in the package that the City Planning Commission is going to be considering. What they do with those and whether they approve all 4 of those types, a limited subset, is a little unclear, but the Planning Commission's also been very steadily against the whole homes.
Yeah, one idea, or a couple of ideas actually, was to limit the number of whole homes in a block and also to limit the number of days that a whole home can be rented in a year.
Well, the main proposal is limiting the number per block, and that's in the proposal as it speaks. It would be somewhere between 2 and 4. The more urban areas of the city near the river would have 3 or 4. The more suburban areas would have 2. That would generate, if every whole home rental that was allowed under that did become a whole home rental, it would be about 15,000 whole home rentals in the city. Now, the Landry administration says that's a very unlikely scenario. We're currently at about 4,000 rentals in the city, but the
not all whole home.
The vast majority.
Are?
It's about 4,300 total. About 72% of those are whole home rentals.
And how is that impacting neighborhoods? I mean, opponents say it's having a terrible impact on our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, the opponents would argue that it's, it really disrupts the fabric of a neighborhood. That you've got these rentals that are, in some cases noisy. In a lot of cases, the owners aren't really invested in the neighborhoods, the neighborhood as a community, so they're not really concerned about that. The proponents, however, would say, in a lot of cases, this is a way to reduce blight. People come in, they fix up homes, and they turn them turn them around. It, in some cases, helped people keep a home that otherwise they might not be able to afford. So and they've also made the argument that if you don't have the revenue you get from the whole home rentals, which the city will be collecting because they can now collect hotel taxes on them, you don't have the money to fund enforcement to keep unlicensed people from doing it.
So anybody who's doing these short-term rentals then would have to register with the city and pay taxes?
They'd have to get a license, they'd have to pay taxes.
Otherwise, they'd be doing it illegally.
Right, which they currently are, and which they're not really
being enforced.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so it's week after next when City Planning Commission comes up with this report that it'll submit to the council.
Mm-hmm. And the council will be sometime later this fall or early winter.
And I'm sure there'll be a lot of public hearings about this.
Yes.
Okay, Jeff, thanks a lot.
And the council can go its own way regardless of what the Planning Commission does.
The council it won't be bound by the Planning Commission, but it's a pretty strong statement when the Planning Commission comes out one way or the other.
Okay. All righty, Jeff. Thanks a lot. Over to Kathy. And you did a piece, the upcoming New Orleans Magazine issue of the New Orleans Magazine, an article about businesses. New businesses are either expanding or coming to this area.
Right. Essentially, I was contrasting with what's going on upriver in the South Louisiana industrial corridor, where you see these massive petrochemical plants and all of these huge projects that have been going on. In New Orleans, of course, you're not seeing the petrochemical industry so much. We still have a lot of oil and gas service jobs and that sort of thing here. We have a lot going on at the port. But there's also a lot of the smaller business startups and entrepreneurial accelerators going on. And we've seen that New Orleans has gained more fame, so to speak, around the country as an entrepreneurial hub. I think that's in part because there's been a lot of success with business accelerators setting up shop in New Orleans. Accelerators and incubators, but really more the accelerator concept these days.
What does that mean? What do they do?
This is groups of established business owners who have come together and formed groups such as Propeller. There's one called Propeller, and there's a launch pad. There's one called Intellectual Property. It's an IP building downtown where they give space, either low cost or even free space, to startup entrepreneurs to help get them going and help them with what they need to get started up. But more than that is the mentoring that they do and the networking that they do. These established companies that really want to invest in these companies, it's a way to get smaller amounts of money by investors into small companies, rather than having to have a couple of $1 million to become a member of what they call an angel capital or venture capital group. You can set up shop with these. You can rely on these little accelerators to kind of find promising companies for you, come to you and say, would you like to put $100,000, $200,000 into this? And if they do, they can maybe take an equity position in it. They maybe just provide their guidance along the way. Mm-hmm. But it's become increasingly popular to do this all across the country.
And is it growing businesses in New Orleans?
It is growing businesses. And you see, I know you've heard about the pitch contests they have all across the city. And Idea Village was instrumental in getting Entrepreneur Week started. It's every January, and this brings really thousands of people, both entrepreneurs and investors, into the city for a whole week or a whole month even of just a lot of networking and activity that really is focused on bringing up these startups and helping them get a leg up. And of course, a high number of startup companies never make it to year 5 or even year 3. Mm-hmm. But these are people who know that and who are prepared for that and willing to deal with it, and they'd still like to help people out.
And so are we still seeing new companies starting up like this?
We are. We just, actually one reason I was writing this was that several new companies had gotten grants from Propeller. They'd gotten $25,000 awards from a competition, and these are all what they call social entrepreneurs who are doing work in setting up shop in water management, water quality, food, the healthcare industry, and education, those kinds of things that are really people-oriented. And they're really trying to encourage those kinds of businesses. They've had quite a few that have turned out.
So to learn more about the various businesses that are coming on board, and then also, like I said, expanding, it's in the August issue of New Orleans Magazine. Read it and we'll learn more, right?
I think so.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot, Kathy. Over to Clancy again right now. And you sort of touched on it because in politics we also have congressional races here in Louisiana, U.S. Senate, and also some House seats. How is that looking?
Well, the Senate race is a cattle call. I wrote my Gambit column on it that's coming out Sunday and Monday that it's unusual to see a race in Louisiana or elsewhere that draws a larger field than the Kentucky Derby, and it typically gets 20 horses. We got 24 people, not all of them thoroughbreds, running for the U.S. Senate. And it's going to be a heck of a stretch run to November 8th, and it could be a photo finish to finish all the racetrack metaphors.
At least Tom Vincent doesn't have any candidates.
That we know of.
That we know of, right.
He's got enough to worry about right now. But, with David Duke in there, that's, who knows what can happen there. Does he still have any popularity left, any pull after pleading guilty to bilking his own supporters through tax fraud and mail fraud? Pleaded guilty to that, went to jail, was sentenced to 15 months in the early 2000s. But he's still doing what he does. The guy makes a living off hate, and he literally makes a living off of it.
And he qualified to run as a Republican.
Qualified to run as a Republican.
And the party's
he became
not
a Republican
happy about
that. Not quite 20, about 25 years ago. And so now he's out there doing the Duke thing, and he's going to look for a lot of free media. I don't know if he's going to get as much free media now as he got, when he was still kind of a new thing. He's not new anymore.
The stand of the GOP about Duke's candidacy here, the Republican Party in Louisiana.
Well, the Republican State Central Committee is in a censuring mood right now. They want to censure Jay Darden, some of them, not all of them, and we'll see if there's any really traction to that, but they want to censure Jay Darden and Scott Angel for not endorsing David Vitter in the governor's race. And the question could be asked, well, what about Bobby Jindal? He didn't endorse Vitter either. A lot of other people. Newell Norman endorsed Republican sheriff of Jefferson Parish. He endorsed John Bell Edwards. Where do you stop with this censure
and made a
business?
strong statement against Vitter.
He went on TV, he made an ad, yeah. So, but there's also a movement, or some talk among Republican State Central Committee members that can they find a way to kind of put Duke in a box? They can't stop him from registering as a Republican, but the Republican Party owns the intellectual property rights to the use of the Republican elephant logo and any other GOP logo. There's a move afoot, or some discussion at least, about saying that anybody who is running for office as a Republican who has a criminal record or who belongs to a hate group, which would actually get Duke on both counts, because the KKK is clearly a hate group, and he clearly has a federal criminal felony conviction. And I don't know how enforceable that rule is, but maybe it is, because the Republican Party is technically a private enterprise, and they own the intellectual property rights to their logos, and they have a right to protect that logo. And so I think they could make a pretty good case, although if Duke, I think what they would do, and Duke wants people to make him a cause celeb. He wants people to, quote, pick on him. He loves to play the victim card. And to some extent, they may be playing into his hands by doing that. But, if they had this rule a year ago before he qualified, then they could say, look, we got the rule, you can't do it, and that's it. But for them to do it in response to him qualifying might actually elevate his stature. I'm not convinced that Duke has that much popularity left. He ran best when he ran statewide in Northeast Louisiana, in the district that is the congressional district that is now held by Dr. Ralph Abraham. I'm sure he would still do well in the so-called redneck areas, but I'm not sure how he's going to do it. If he doesn't pull at least 10% in mid-October, I don't think he's got a chance to make the runoff.
Jeff, did you have a question?
Well, but that's an interesting point, though, because if he does make the runoff, and if a Democrat is his opponent in the runoff, we could end up with a very similar situation to what we saw with John Bell.
Well, this time it would be vote against a crook. That's important, because Duke is now officially a crook. So.
With 24 candidates, it's going to be interesting to see how the numbers play out, basically, how it breaks up.
You could have a scenario where 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans or any other combination makes this runoff with so many candidates in the race.
Not to mention how to arrange the Senate debates. I mean, that's going to be an issue, too. So, okay, I'm going to move over to Jeff now. And tomorrow you have a piece coming out in The Advocate about lead levels.
Yeah, there's a new study from Tulane University looking at lead levels in both soil and in children in New Orleans. And it's fascinating because it's comparing New Orleans now to where it was pre-Katrina. And one of the major things the research suggests is that flooding during Katrina may have actually helped decrease the amount of lead that's being ingested by children in the city. And we all know the dangers of lead.
Yeah.
Lots of cognitive issues can increase tendencies towards violence and that sort of thing. But the study found really, really dramatic decreases in both the lead that's in the soil and the lead that they found when they did blood tests on children, all across the city. Now, the assumption of or the theory of the researchers is that there were a couple major factors. One was that the flooding helped bring in new sediment, which created sort of a protective layer over the ground, reduced the amount of lead that's being exposed that way. Obviously, all the renovations, the reconstruction effort resulted in a lot of buildings that had lead in paint and those sorts of things being fixed up. And then you have some more minor stuff like shoring, where people are building up their lots to get above the flood level.
And new soil being
new
brought
soil
in.
that's clean, doesn't have lead in it. So all these factors, they're sort of saying, show that just a little bit of new soil and relatively inexpensive interventions can prevent a lot of lead from being transmitted through soil. Obviously, there's still concerns with lead in pipes. We have very old pipes in the city, lead in other sources, but it does sort of point to some interesting implications.
And so this one, though, doesn't touch on water.
This does not touch
just
on
in
water.
soil and the blood samples.
There's other researchers currently currently working in New Orleans trying to get a handle on exactly what the how much lead is coming in through the pipes, and that's some other research we're following.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow morning in The Advocate. Thanks. All righty, looking ahead, Errol.
Come November, people in Kinnett will have an extra reason to go to the polls, and that's to elect a new mayor to succeed Mike Yanni, who was elected parish president. Qualifying is closed. 5 people qualified. 3 of them are incumbent council members. So we're going to be seeing a lot of politics in Kinnett.
Okay, Clancy.
School board races are very hot in New Orleans, although 2 incumbents were reelected without opposition. But I think in the elections that remain, it's going to be, almost as hot as a presidential race when you consider that the recovery school district schools are going to be coming back under local control during the tenure of the new school board.
Okay, thanks. Kathy?
Well, the hotel industry is continuing to pay more attention to millennials and the younger generation of tourists, and we're seeing a second Moxie Hotel is going to be built in New Orleans. There's already one on O'Keefe. This one's going to be near Lafayette Square. This is a Marriott brand that caters to that young, hip set.
Okay, Kathy?
Well,
Thanks,
in
Jeff.
Other election news, we've also got a couple of contested judicial elections, which always create some interest. Both open seats. Going to be interesting to see how those shake out.
And Orleans Criminal?
Orleans Criminal and Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal.
Okay, that's right. Thanks a lot. Thanks, you guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. And we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.